And hello to everyone. So welcome. I'm very happy to be with you all who have taken a big step to join a course on emptiness. And thank you to Venerable Droma for sharing a session from or a few sessions from the course to do review of His Holiness teachings. So yeah, at the outset, why don't we take a moment and generate a positive motivation and check your own motivation. Make sure it's not just selfish and not just limited to this life alone, but in order to benefit oneself and as well benefit others, recognizing our interconnectedness and our interconnectedness with the entire world, and try to generate a motivation to bring about the welfare of oneself, other sentient beings, humans, non-humans, animals as well, in this life and future lives, for however long we exist. Try to think then by engaging in this session, may it bring about only the welfare of myself and all other sentient beings. Okay, so His Holiness spoke for almost an hour this morning from his own side before he took some questions. So during this review session, there's four main parts, right? So we have 2 hours together. So first, I'll just kind of go through some of the main points that His Holiness made. That's one part. And then I want to give ample time for you all to ask questions. So that's probably the main part, right? And then we'll do some meditation together. We'll see how it goes, but if it seems appropriate, then we'll do a little meditation on emptiness together. And then if we have time left, so we'll break out into discussion groups so you all can discuss some of your thoughts and questions with each other. And we'll do that at the end because there are people following, I think, online on like YouTube or Facebook or something. So when we do discussion groups, then they don't have anything to look at, right? So that's why we'll do that last. Okay, so I know this is the 3rd time I'm doing review sessions of His Holiness teachings in the last 3 months. And I tend to just go into too much detail and then not leave enough time for questions. So I'll try not to do that today. So I'm just going to mention, basically I made kind of 4 main outlines, 4 main kind of topics that His Holiness spoke about in general, right? So I'll just list those and then try to fill in some detail, a little bit more about each of those, yeah, and then go on to other stuff. So first, as almost always, His Holiness begins his talk by emphasizing that the essence of Buddhism, the essence of any religious practice, is loving kindness and compassion, right? Generating a kind heart, becoming a good person, basically. And that's common to all religious traditions, is this emphasis on training and developing, increasing our loving kindness and compassion, our determination, I guess you could say, not to harm others and to benefit other sentient beings. So that's common to all religious traditions, and especially in ancient Indian, the religious traditions of ancient India, this emphasized this ahimsa, non-violence, and karuna, compassion. And so that's the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, when he's born into an Indian family, that's the kind of culture that he's arisen from. So then His Holiness mentioned today, especially, so what did Shakyamuni Buddha add to that? Is he added this sort of emphasis on logic and reason and supporting the behavior of nonviolence and compassion with a philosophical view that is an underpinning for why those things are important, right? And actually how to reduce harming others by reducing afflictive emotions in our mind, right? By reducing the very root cause of afflictive emotions in our mind, which is self-centered attitude, and the very root cause of that, which is grasping at an inherently existent self, right? Self of persons and self-dominant. So yeah, so Buddha, His Holiness was saying that at the time, during the Buddha's lifetime, the predominant kind of worldview among different religious traditions in India was that there's a creator God, right? There's like a powerful God that's created everything, created the universe, And that's why, that's why sometimes we have problems and sometimes we have success, because that's kind of the intention of this God. So whereas Buddha taught something radically different, which is that there is no creator God whatsoever, but everything arises due to its appropriate causes and conditions, right? So this is the fundamental Buddhist worldview, a philosophical view, is of dependent arising. Everything exists as a dependent arising, and in dependence upon what? Not a creator God, but rather their appropriate causes and conditions, right? So hopefully you've all been speaking about this in the emptiness course already. So then this leads to, so also as part of this kind of review, what I like to emphasize is some of the verses that His Holiness cited, cited during his talks, because when His Holiness is speaking, oftentimes he'll just quickly quote a verse in Tibetan, or just even quote just the first line, assuming that the audience knows what he's talking about. And usually the translator, oftentimes he doesn't have time to translate that, because these are very pithy verses. So what I do in preparation for these review sessions is I go through His Holiness talk again and pull out the verses that His Holiness has quoted. And usually His Holiness quotes, there's probably about 20 or 30 verses that His Holiness cites again and again and again. So once you become familiar with them, you can spot them quite easily. So like for today, I didn't need to find any new verses. I just copy pasted from things that His Holiness has quoted over the last few sessions, few teachings. So the first verse His Holiness quoted here was, in the context of what did the Buddha realize that had not been realized kind of before. So this is the quote. This is the verse that the Buddha spoke in the Lalita Vistara Sutra, and this is a verse that the Buddha spoke immediately after he was enlightened. Right. So he was meditating under the Bodhi tree. At the end of 6 years of practicing austerities and striving, with great effort in his kind of meditation practice. Then he eventually became enlightened under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. And it said, so when he became enlightened, actually, he's in meditative equipoise. So when he arose from that meditative equipoise, then he spoke this verse. This ambrosial dharma I have attained is profound, peaceful, free of elaborations, luminous and unconditioned. Even if I explain it, no one will understand. I think I shall remain silent in the forest. Right? So then the Buddha actually did remain silent for 7 weeks. It said he didn't teach, he didn't speak to anyone, more or less. So His Holiness gave quite some explanation of this verse, especially the second line. He said, so I just typed this up here. His Holiness explains that in the second line, profound and peaceful refers to the Four Noble Truths, and then free of elaborations refers to emptiness, and then luminous and unconditioned refers to basically the pure nature of the mind that has existed since beginningless time, exists now, and will exist in the future. And eventually, that's what makes enlightenment possible, right? So this pure, essential, clear, luminous nature of the mind that has been present from the beginningless time, that's what's indicated by luminous and unconditioned there. So this document with all these quotes, it's in the Google Drive folder. And you're welcome to download it and use for yourself. Also in that folder, there's this other, I'll just point out now. Sorry, I don't have it open on my desktop. Anyway, there's another nice document of verses that includes many of the verses His Holiness quotes again and again, but there are verses primarily by Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti that His Holiness often advises his students to memorize and recite and contemplate on every day, if they're serious about wanting to meditate on emptiness, right? So that fits nicely in your course. Okay, so the first main heading, His Holiness talks about, is loving kindness and compassion. The second main heading is the Four Noble Truths. Third main heading is kind of, he's talking about the sort of this connection between the Tibetans and the Chinese in their Buddhist path, right? In their Buddhist tradition. And he talks a lot about the Chinese pilgrim Hunsang there. And then finally, the third main heading, His Holiness talks about Lama Tsongkapa a little bit, and then he explains the actual text, right? So just to go back to the second heading, His Holiness spoke about the Four Noble Truths. in his Holiness book quite in detail about the Four Noble Truths. But just to summarize what he said was basically, it's kind of the logic of the sequence of the Four Noble Truths, right? In the way that we ordinarily see them presented is first is the truth of suffering. Why? Just because we need to realize that we have suffering, that we have a problem. It's like if someone has a sickness, first they have to realize there is a problem, that they're sick, there's something wrong. And then in order to generate an intention to actually do something about it, right, to fix the problem. So instead of just shoving it away or not thinking about it, we have to realize that there is suffering in our lives. And then the question is, well, why is there suffering? What are the causes? Why is this present? And is there something I can do about it, right? So that's what's explained in the truth of the causes of suffering, the second noble truth. And there, the Buddha explains that the two main causes of suffering are one, contaminated karma we've created. So for example, if we kill other sentient beings, even insects, then we create karma such that, we reap what we sow. That kind of experience that we inflict on others, whether it's harmful or helpful. So in the case of killing, of course, it's harmful. Then we will have that kind of experience in the future, right? So due to the kind of karma we create, primarily by the way we treat other people, with our physical actions, with our speech, and even with our minds alone, then we have that kind of experience in the future. Okay, so just, I'm getting a note on my screen that my internet connection is unstable. So just before we get cut off, hopefully we won't, but I'm in rural India, right? So, and I have a pretty good internet connection, but it's not good all the time. So if I get cut off, then please be patient and I'll try to log on again. Usually I can, but if I can't, then Felipe will entertain you somehow. I'm not sure. But yeah. So, okay, so then in the truth of the cause of suffering, so the first main cause is karma. And then the second main cause is, so the main cause of karma, why do we create karma? Through the power of afflictive emotions, right? So emotions like attachment, greed, jealousy on one hand, and then anger, hatred, enmity, vengeance on the other hand. And then the root of attachment and anger, then of course is what you're mainly looking at in the emptiness course in terms of afflictive emotions, is ignorance. And not just any kind of ignorance, but ignorance grasping at inherent existence, right? So we'll talk more about what that means later, what inherent existence means. Hopefully you've been talking about it with Venerable Droma already, but we'll come back to it. So, so basically, karma and afflictive emotions are the main causes of suffering. That's why we suffer. So if we want to eliminate suffering, we have to eliminate those, right? We have to see if we can purify and reduce and gradually eliminate karma and the imprints of karma that are in our mind streams, imprints of karmic actions that we've created before. And we have to reduce the afflictive emotions we have in our mind streams, our anger, attachment, jealousy, arrogance, pride, and so forth, right? So then the question is, well, is it really possible to do that? Is it really possible to get rid of our attachment, to get rid of our anger, to get rid of our arrogant pride, our selfishness? And so here the Buddhist answer is yes, it is possible, because all of those different afflictive emotions, and thereby all of the karma, which are results of those afflictive emotions, they all arise from one fundamental cause, right? And what is that cause? It is a distorted way of seeing ourselves. Basically, we exaggerate the reality of the self. We don't see how we're interconnected, how as a person we're interconnected with infinite other things, other people, the natural environment, and as a person, we're dependent upon our parts. Basically, as a person, we are, well, almost you could say we're a collection of parts. Why almost? Because actually we're something that's imputed upon a collection of parts. And we have no more substantial existence than that. So when we search through, so what is the collection of parts that we're based on? Is our body and all the parts of our body, all the cells and bones and blood and organs and so forth, all the parts of our body and all the parts of our mind. Our mind is and so our mind is a general term that covers many, many different kinds of mental experience, from something as simple as an eye consciousness and experiencing visual objects to something as subtle as what is it? The innately innately arising clear light mind, right? That goes from life to life, which is Holiness talked about at the end of the session in response to one of the questions, this most subtle level of mental consciousness, right? So there's very gross sense consciousness, like eye, ear, nose, tongue consciousness, to this different levels of mental consciousness and a very most subtle level of mental consciousness. So all of those are what we mean by mind. So all of those different parts of our mind, different parts of our body, on that collection, right, of different parts of mind and parts of body, we label I, the person. But is there something more substantial than that? When you look through all those parts, you cannot find anything concrete that is I, that is the person, right? But that's not how it appears to us ordinarily. Ordinarily, when we think, you know, especially say when someone insults us, or we feel offended, or we feel very afraid, or we're craving for something, it appears to our mind like there's this real, concrete, you know, truly existent I, that it just is there without any question. And thereby I have to do things to satisfy that I, you know? So then we become slaves to a wrong concept, basically, a misapprehension of the way we exist. And we lead our lives trying to, you know, seek out happiness and escape problems and suffering for the purpose of an I that doesn't even exist. Now, does that mean we don't exist? There is no person? I don't exist? No. There is a person, like we exist, but the way we exist is something much less concrete than we ordinarily think, right? Than we ordinarily perceive. Because otherwise, if we didn't exist, then there'd be no point for coming to courses like this. There'd be no point for striving for liberation and enlightenment. There'd be no point studying the Four Noble Truths or listening to what the Buddha says, because the Buddha doesn't exist, I don't exist, nobody exists, then there's no point to anything, right? So we exist, you know, the person exists, other people exist, the Buddha exists, but not in the way that it ordinarily appears to our mind. Okay, so because the main causes for suffering, karma and afflictive emotions, they arise from one fundamental source, this ignorance grasping at an inherently existent I. And because that grasping is, it's a completely wrong mind. Therefore, when we realize truly the way we exist, the way we actually exist, then we can eliminate that ignorance. And thereby we can bring a cease to, we can end the arising of all those afflictive emotions and all the karma. So thereby, so now we come to the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. Okay, the truth of cessation. So it's possible to bring a cessation, bring an end to suffering and the causes of suffering, right? So then the question is, well, how do we actually do that? And that's what's explained in the fourth noble truth, right? The truth of the path. Yeah. So this is kind of this whole summary. So there's two verses. I have to say, I've been looking at, I'm looking at the grid view here on Zoom. And in my grid view, there, Claudia Martinez is in my right-hand corner. And she's got her hands up to her mouth like this. I thought she actually had her video on. So I thought for like 15 minutes, she's continually like in shock. But actually, I realized it's a photograph. Anyway. So these two verses that it's Holiness quoted. So next two verses, here is Holiness quoted in the course of explaining the truths. Yeah, so one by Nagarjuna, collection of verses, His Holiness recommends that we meditate on every day. So he says, so this basically explains the Four Noble Truths, what I was just talking about. By exhausting karma and afflictive emotions, one is liberated, right? So remember, what are karma and afflictive emotions in terms of the Four Noble Truths? They're the second, the truth of the cause of suffering, right? So by exhausting means eliminating, bringing to an end. By exhausting karma and afflictive emotions, one is liberated. So this means you achieve nirvana. So then the question is, well, where do those come from? Karma and afflictive emotions come from false conceptions, right? So I don't have time to explain what's meant by false conceptions here, but if you want to know, we can ask a question. You come back to it. So those false conceptions come from elaboration. So elaboration is kind of a, I don't know, a catchphrase. It's just a short term that means the inherent existence, grasping at inherent existence, right? So basically false conception. So karma and afflictive emotions come from false conceptions. Those false conceptions come from the elaboration, which is the ignorance grasping at inherent existence. And so how do you cease that ignorance? It is ceased by emptiness, or it is ceased in emptiness. So here the footnote is very important, because apparently the Sanskrit, so remember, this is English is translated from Tibetan, that Tibetan is translated from Sanskrit, because Nagarjuna is an ancient Indian scholar who was composing in Sanskrit. So in Sanskrit, that it is ceased by emptiness. The Sanskrit which expresses that can also read, it is ceased in emptiness, right? So that's what it says in the footnote down there. I won't read it, but basically when it says, so all basically the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, when you say they are ceased in emptiness, it's talking about the truth of cessation. When they say that they are ceased by emptiness, it's talking about the truth of the path. Okay, and then another quote that's in that collection, that His Holiness, maybe it's not there. Anyway, His Holiness quotes these two verses again and again and again. So His Holiness gave some explanation of these verses, but I'll just kind of go through them quickly. Just as the body sense power pervades the body, ignorance is present in all the afflictive emotions. Right? So think your body sense power is that kind of energy that runs through the surface of your body and all the parts of your body that allow you to feel hot and cold, smooth and coarse, pleasure and pain, physical pleasure and pain. So that pervades the entire body. So just as the body sense power pervades or is present in the entire body, ignorance is present in all the afflictive emotions, right? So whenever we have, so this is very important to check for your practice. This is extremely important point for your meditation practice and for your contemplation practice. When you see yourself becoming angry, or you see yourself giving rise to attachment or greed, jealousy, check how the I appears to you at that time. So, because a fundamental Buddhist assertion is that this ignorance grasping at the inherently existent I, a person. So where we have a very concrete and exaggerated view of the reality and the independence of our I, that ignorance goes along with, it accompanies attachment, anger, jealousy, fear, all the other afflictive emotions. And the stronger those other afflictive emotions are, the stronger the grasping at a real concrete I is. Right? So this is something we should be able to see in our experience, whether that's true or not. But that's what. So then why is that important? So just as the body sense power pervades the body, ignorance is present in all afflictive emotions. So please, I just remembered, I feel like I'm starting to speed up. So I tend to talk too fast for people who are not so familiar with this material. So if you find I'm talking so fast you can't follow, please write a note in the chat. And but anyway, I'll try to slow down. So just as the body sense power pervades the body, ignorance is present in all afflictive emotions. By overcoming ignorance, you will also overcome all the afflictive emotions, right? So because ignorance accompanies and is basically giving rise to all the other afflictive emotions, then by reducing and gradually eliminating this ignorance, grasping at a concrete I, you can reduce and eliminate all the other afflictive emotions, right? Like attachment and anger. It's a good pace, Amelia said. Okay, thank you, Amelia. And then, okay, so then the question is, well, how to overcome ignorance. So that's what the second verse is about. When dependent arising is seen, ignorance will not occur. Right? So how do we overcome ignorance? By viewing dependent arising, looking how everything is interrelated, and especially how things exist in dependence upon causes and conditions. They exist in dependence upon their parts. They exist by comparison to others, and especially they exist in dependence upon mental imputation. Right? So we'll come back to that a lot more, hopefully. But that's what, in short, the key here is by meditating on and realizing, deepening our wisdom, understanding dependent arising, thereby we eliminate ignorance, right? Therefore, make every effort in every way to realize just this teaching, right? So this is from a commentary by Nagarjuna's main disciple, Arya Deva, and the whole commentary is about emptiness, right? So when he says realize just this teaching, he's talking about emptiness. Okay, and then so that's basically His Holiness went through the Four Noble Truths like that. The truth of suffering. Where does suffering come from? It comes from its appropriate causes, afflictive emotions and karma. Where do those come from? They come from ignorance, just fundamental ignorance, grasping at inherent existence. Because that is a wrong concept, it can be eliminated by wisdom. Therefore, we can achieve, it's possible to achieve a cessation of suffering. Right? The third noble truth is the truth of cessation. How do we do that? By practicing the path. Right? So that's the fourth noble truth, the practice of the path. So the path can be divided into two parts. The method side, which is things like, patience, compassion, practicing pure morality, practicing generosity, generating meditative concentration, and the wisdom. So that's all called the method side of the path. And then there's the wisdom side of the path, which is essentially the wisdom realizing emptiness, right? So those are the two aspects of the path. But here, His Holiness talked about the truth of the path in terms of the three higher trainings. What's called the three higher trainings. Right, so I'll just mention briefly. So there's the higher training in ethical discipline, which means for lay people, it means basically abandoning, for all of us, it means first of all, initially, abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? So basically abandoning like killing, stealing, lying, and so forth. So not harming others, in short. So based on living a life whereby we try to refrain from harming others with our body, speech, and mind, our mind becomes more calm, more clear, and thereby we're able to practice the second higher training, the higher training of concentration, right? So we're able to keep our mind more focused on whatever object we want to focus our attention on at any given time. So why is this important? Like His Holiness said, because when we reflect on emptiness, we can get an intellectual idea of emptiness. We can get some understanding, some feeling for emptiness, but usually only for a very short time, for fleeting moments. It doesn't last long, right? But in order to destroy the ignorance, which is the root of all samsara, we need to have a very concentrated mind that deeply realizes emptiness for a long time, right? And again and again and again, a mind that's deeply absorbed in the truth of emptiness. Why? Because think, we've had this wrong concept about how we exist, about how other people and other things exist since beginningless time, right? For hundreds, thousands, millions of years, right? We're habituated to this way of seeing things that is distorted, that is wrong. So to undo all of that, first of all, we can't do just in a short time and just easily, and we can't do with just a superficial level of awareness. We have to generate this understanding of the way things actually exist at a very deep level of our mind, a very subtle level of mind, and with very stable concentration, and in a way that we can sustain that realization for long periods of time, right? Only in that way can we gradually undo these knots of ignorance and purify, right, the imprints of ignorance. So we practice the higher training of wisdom based upon the higher training of meditative concentration, which is based upon the higher training of ethics, of ethical discipline, right? So that is kind of the three higher trainings, and that's kind of about the truth of the path. So, yeah. So that's the first two outline headings. So here's Holiness kind of goes more into, because the main audience for the teaching this morning is some Buddhist groups from Taiwan. Well, I must praise them. They did an amazing, excellent job organizing a very nice teaching event. I was so impressed how many people were there. They had these big auditoriums, one with mostly lay people, one with all the Sangha. Everyone was wearing a mask. Everyone socially distanced. They had cameras in all the venues, so you can see that people, rather than just looking at a Zoom screen all the time, and asked very good questions. And it was very well organized. So His Holiness wanted to create some kind of rapport with them and remind them about between the Tibetans and the Chinese. Although of course there's this conflict right now where communist China has occupied Tibet and caused incredible suffering to the Tibetan people, and really destroyed big swaths of Tibetan Buddhist culture over the last 50 years. So it's possible there's some animosity, but His Holiness was reminding the audience about this common shared heritage of Buddhism on one hand, and especially the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism on the other hand. So just to skip back a little bit, right at the outset of the teaching, His Holiness emphasized that there's something really special about the kind of Tibetan lineage of Buddhism, because it comes from the Nalanda tradition. The Nalanda tradition is primarily the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism versus the Pali tradition of Buddhism. So whereas in the Pali tradition of Buddhism, which is primarily followed in like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, they basically more or less take at face value any of what's taught in the sutras, right? The word of the Buddha, they take it at face value. So to establish something as a teaching of Buddha, they look to what's said in the sutras and pretty much just accept what is said in the sutras at face value without going into more detail. Whereas in the Sanskrit, and there's not much emphasis on logic and reasoning, so then a lot of problems arise. Well, how do you interpret different statements when the Buddha makes statements that are apparently contradictory? How do you deal with that, right? So whereas in the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism, there's emphasis on logic and reason, especially as taught by Dharmakirti and Dignaga. And so those are very powerful tools, first of all, to establish the validity of Buddhist teachings, to establish the possibility of liberation and enlightenment, and also to understand why the Buddha taught apparently contradictory things to different people at different times, right? So, so that comes from the Nalanda tradition. And then His Holiness spoke a lot about this Chinese pilgrim, monk, Hunsang, how he came to India and studied the Nalanda tradition, and then brought it back to China. And there were also several other famous Chinese pilgrims who came to ancient India. So this is around even like 200 BC to about 200-300 CE. There were different Chinese pilgrims coming to ancient India, studying, translating text, collecting text, taking them back to China. And whereas Buddhism spread to Tibet only much later, right? So, but then His Holiness spoke a little bit about Songtsen Gampo and how, kind of joking, how Songtsen Gampo, he took a lot like culture of food from China. He took clothing he adopted from China. I think his first wife he took from China. His Holiness spoke a lot about the main Buddha statue, the most sacred Buddhist object in Lhasa, in the capital of Tibet, the Joel statue. The Songtsen Gampo's Chinese wife, who was a princess in China, she brought that as a gift. So that came from China. But then when it came to the writing, he said Chinese characters are too much problematic, too difficult. Because every Chinese characters, for every word, there's a completely different character, right? It's not like a alphabet style written language. So for the written language, Songtsen Gampo thought written Chinese is too difficult. So he took from the Devanagari script from India. And then the Buddhism, so the Buddhism that's spread in China, and then later the Buddhism that spread in Tibet both come from India, and they both come from especially the Nalanda tradition, right? So that they have in common. And then His Holiness spoke about a later Buddhist king called Tenzin, and how he's the one who actually first brought the first Indian Buddhist Pandit to Tibet, Chandrakirti is his name, and they established the first monastery. They did the first major translation work, yeah, the Buddhism really kind of started to spread in a serious way at that time. And so the Chandrakirti was an abbot of Nalanda Monastery, and Chandrakirti was a great scholar of logic, of Buddhist logic, right? So Chandrakirti is after Dignaga and Dharmakirti. He actually wrote a commentary on Dharmakirti's main work on Buddhist logic. So right from the beginning of the prominent spread of Buddhism in Tibet, there was an emphasis on the importance of logic and reason. So then His Holiness kind of concluded that section by saying, we're brothers and sisters in the Dharma. We're common inheritors of the Nalanda tradition. We're part of the same Dharma family. And in this vein, His Holiness also encouraged the Taiwanese audience to reach out to their brothers and sisters in mainland China and make connections with them. And not in order to spread Buddhism, but in order to spread these essential Buddhist teachings about the method, the techniques to increase our loving kindness and compassion, and thereby resolve, human conflict, and anger and violence, and depression, loneliness. Because Buddhism and ancient, Indian tradition has very powerful tools for creating better mental health, right? For creating happy individuals. So he was encouraging them to share those and to interact in dialogue with science, right? So another part of this, the Sanskrit tradition, having a very strong emphasis on logic and reason, His Holiness was saying that it makes it very possible and very easy to have fruitful dialogues with science and to kind of, under scientific investigation, to hold up, right? And show that actually there is Buddhist wisdom that can be known by logic and by experience, and thereby can be offered to people and used by people in the world, separate from a religious tradition, and not based on just applying to faith and just applying to the reasoning that, well, the Buddha said this and therefore it's true, right? Okay, so that's kind of it for that third heading. So now His Holiness moved to the fourth heading here to actually talk about Lama Tsongkapa, who's the author of the main text that His Holiness read today. So Tsongkapa he didn't say so much about him. His Holiness was saying, all the major scholars of India, from, the Nima scholars, so Longchen Rabjampa, the past, to Sakya Pandita, of scholars of the Kagyu tradition, and then finally of the four Tibetan traditions, the one that Tsongkapa founded, the Gelugpa tradition, is the youngest. So finally, Tsongkapa, they all read these works of on emptiness by Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Buddha Palita, and so forth. But the entire works of Nagarjuna, and especially the entire works of Chandrakirti, were not translated until shortly before the time of Tsongkapa. So of these major scholars of Tibet who came before Tsongkapa, most of them probably didn't have access to to Chandrakirti's commentaries on Nagarjuna's works on emptiness. But anyway, so Tsongkapa, read the entirety of works by Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, what is it? I'm missing one now. Anyway, Buddha Palita, Bhavi Viveka, and then last Chandrakirti, and also Shantideva. He read those works, and then so Tsongkapa very much emphasized instead of relying on Tibetan commentaries and simply relying on Indian commentaries, going back to the ancient Indian commentaries and going back to the sutras, actually the word of the Buddha, and basing our understanding on Buddhist teachings on those, right? Rather than later Pith instructions, right? So Tsongkapa emphasized having this broad, first of all, putting a lot of emphasis in the study. So let's mention how basically for the first 40 years of his life, Tsongkapa was, intensely studying, the vast sutras and the ancient Indian commentaries on the sutras. But he wasn't only, and thereby he became a great scholar, but he wasn't only a great scholar in an intellectual sense, he was also a profound practitioner. All through his life, he was meditating a lot, doing meditation retreats, usually staying in remote, hermitages and places. But especially from the time he was 36, with this group of the 8 pure entourage, or 8 pure disciples, he went into almost exclusive meditation retreat from the time of 36. And then, so 4 years later, at the time he's 40, was when he had this profound realization of emptiness. And then he composed this famous work that His Holiness taught 2 months ago, In Praise of Dependent Origination. And then, so from the time he's 40, that he realized emptiness until Tsongkapa passed away at the age of 63. So for the next 23 years, he composed 18 volumes of works, which in terms of other Tibetan scholars, it's not a huge amount, as Holiness was saying, but if you look at the quality of his works, it's incredible. They're incredible, high quality, dense, rich, and really, really kind of perfect commentaries on the Buddhist teachings. So among those, His Holiness said, this one, Essence of Eloquence, is one of his favorite. Whenever he travels, he's never separated from it. He always takes a copy of it with him. Yeah. So the main thing, this work, actually the short title is Essence of Eloquence. The long title is Essence of Eloquence, Distinguishing the Interpretive and Definitive Meanings. Right. So what does that mean? So we have to know, like, well, what does it mean to be interpretive versus definitive, right? So let's start with the later, right? A definitive teaching means basically it's a teaching about the ultimate truth. So it's a teaching about emptiness, the most fundamental level of reality, right? So it's a teaching about ultimate truth, and the way it teaches ultimate truth is a way in such that just as the words are said, we can accept that meaning as it is, without having to make some interpretation that, oh, actually it means this. So we can take the words at face value, or we can take the words literally, right? We can take those statements about emptiness, we can accept them literally as they are, without further interpretation. Whereas, so that's what it means to be a definitive teaching, right? So an interpretive teaching is a teaching that it can have both or one of two characteristics. Either it's not about emptiness, right? So it's not about ultimate truth, rather it's about conventional truth. So it's like about the method side of the path, or other things like practicing pure morality, generating good concentration, being generous. So it's about something else other than emptiness. Or it teaches about emptiness, but not in a way that we can accept it at face value. Not in a way that we can take those words literally as they're stated, but we have to interpret it. So interpretive teachings, in short, they mean that, you cannot directly understand or immediately understand the ultimate intention of the Buddha or the ultimate nature of reality based on those. Rather, you have to interpret them as meaning something or intending to lead us to a deeper understanding of emptiness, right? So you have to kind of put a spin on them a little bit. Not like a political spin, but like you have to read into them more, right? You can't just take it face value. So that's interpretive teachings. Whereas definitive teachings are one that they actually mean just what they say, as it is, and they're teaching about emptiness. So yeah, we'll come back to this when we look at the beginning of the text. So that's what this text by Lama Tsongkapa is about, well, how do you distinguish the interpretive teachings of the Buddha and the definitive teachings of the Buddha, right? Again, because the Buddha taught things that are apparently directly contradictory in many different instances. So how do you make sense of that? What is actually what the Buddha intends, and what is something he was just saying, in order to serve a particular cause in that particular situation, and leading us to a deeper understanding. Right? Yeah, I think that's enough said here. So let's just look briefly at the actual text. So again, this document is in the Google Drive folder. This is a translation of just the very first part that His Holiness went through today. I'll just skip through. I don't want to take time to read every word. Basically, at the beginning, it's a praise in Sanskrit, which is tradition, and then it's a praise to Maitreya and Manjushri, and then His Holiness praise in Dalai Lama. Sorry, Lama Tsongkapa, right? Lama Tsongkapa, the author of this text, he's praising these great Indian Pandits, right? Beginning with Nagarjuna and Asanga, and then later. So there are followers: Arya Deva, Buddha Palita, Bhadaviveka, Chandrakirti, Vasubandhu, and then Shiramati, Dignaga, and Dharmakirti. So these Dignaga and Dharmakirti are the masters of logic. So yeah, Tsongkapa begins by praising them, and then make a promise to compose the teaching. And then there's this quotation. So this is, Tsongkapa quotes this from Sutra. This is talking about sort of, it's called the 3 doors of liberation, emptiness, basically. The way is empty, peaceful, and uncreated. Not knowing that, living beings wonder. Moved by compassion, he introduces them with hundreds of reasons and technical procedures. I'm not sure. Technical procedures is a little bit strange translation. I'm not sure what that's translation of. I think that's method, actually. I'm not sure. Anyway, so here the Buddha is basically saying that the way is empty. Basically all phenomena, and the way to liberation and enlightenment is empty of inherent existence. It's peaceful and uncreated. Not knowing that, so because of our ignorance, not knowing that, living beings wonder. It means they wonder in samsara. They suffer in samsara. Moved by compassion, he introduces them. So there he is the Buddha, right? So why does the Buddha teach emptiness? Out of compassion, because he sees sentient beings suffering and sees that their suffering is totally unnecessary. It totally arises from a wrong concept. So thereby, in order to help them eliminate the wrong concept, then he teaches emptiness. And how does he teach emptiness? With hundreds of reasons and technical procedures. I'm not sure what technical procedures. Technical procedures does not mean like, I don't know, like using your wrenches and I don't know, some software in your program or something. I think it means probably like generating ethical discipline, meditative concentration, bodhicitta, compassion, and so forth. All right, so here, I'll just read briefly through. Having seen the extreme difficulty of realizing the actuality of things, without which there is no liberation from the world, the compassionate teacher introduced living beings to that realization through the many doors of reasoning and technical procedures. Thus, the discriminating, so the intelligent, should exert themselves in the technique for realizing thatness, that means emptiness. This depends on the discrimination between the interpretable and definitive meanings of the teaching, right? So why do we have to know the difference between the interpretive and definitive teachings? In order to realize emptiness, right? That's why. So realizing emptiness depends upon what is the ultimate, knowing what is the ultimate intention and the most definitive teachings of the victor, means the Buddha. It is not possible to discriminate between these two on textual authority alone, on some statements such as this is interpretable meaning and this is definitive meaning. Otherwise, the champions, that means the great Indian Pandits, elaborations of explanations of the problem of discrimination between interpretable and definitive would have been pointless. So what he's saying is, if we could just look at some sutras that say this is the interpretive meaning and this is the definitive meaning, and thereby know what it is just based on that, then all the explanations of the past Indian masters about what are the interpretive meanings and what are the definitive meanings would have been pointless, because we could have just looked at what the Buddha said and said, okay, that's what it is. It's not that simple. Right? Further, many different interpretations of interpretable and definitive have been declared in the sutras, right? So in the sutras themselves, there's many different contradictory statements about what are interpretive and what are definitive teachings. So we can't rely on the sutras alone. Finally, since it cannot be established in general by referring to scriptural statements alone, as no such statement would be valid in every case. Neither can it be established by a mere scriptural statement in any particular case. The champions of philosophy foretold to discern the interpretable and definitive teachings, elucidated their inner meaning. So he's saying the Buddha actually foretold, means he gave a prophecy about in the future who will be the Indian masters that will clearly distinguish the interpretive works. Hence, we must seek that meaning by following their determinations, established by reasonings that fault alternative interpretations of definitive meaning sutras, proving their definitiveness as uninterpretable meaning. Thus, ultimately, we must discriminate with impeccable reasoning. So basically what Tsongkapa is saying, finally, we have to depend on reasoning and logic to distinguish which are the correct interpretations of the right way to distinguish the definitive teachings from the interpretive teachings of the Buddha, right? Finally, we have to rely on logic and reasoning. But you can see already it's not easy, right? It's not going to be easy. Should we accept theories violating reason, their teacher could not become the personification of valid cognition. For even the ultimate reality of things includes means of proof through logically established reason. So he's saying if someone teaches something that is not logical, that violates reason, then they're not a valid teacher. And you can't rely on such a person to teach you the ultimate truth, basically. And then this very famous verse that His Holiness quotes almost every teaching he gives. Seeing the ramifications of this, the Lord, means the Buddha, declared, O bhikshus, just as a goldsmith gets his gold or attains his gold, first testing it by melting, cutting, and rubbing. Sages accept my teachings after full examination and not just out of devotion to me. Okay, so I'll stop my little spiel here and give you a chance for questions. So what are your questions? There might be one in the chat already, I think.
Yeah, and there's one from Facebook already, Venerable. I'm gonna send it to you on your chat.
But I really want some questions from the Zoom room team here. You guys who are, you can see. Let's see. The first question is, do you want me to make you co-host? I answered it. I said yes. And the next question is from William. When we talk about our perception of existence, do you mean the psychological idea about who or what we are? See, when you talk about our perception of existence, do you mean about the psychological idea about who or what we are? Yes, basically. It means how the psychological meaning, basically when we talk about our perception of existence, right? We exist, first of all. We have to, don't let go of that. Don't ever, don't be in doubt about whether you exist or not. If you have some doubt about that, just pinch yourself. And if it hurts, you exist, right? So we exist, but then how do we exist? That's the question, right? So where do we begin? We begin by examining that, by looking at, first of all, well, what is my ordinary perception of how do I exist? How do I seem to exist in my own experience? When I look at, okay, do I exist or not? How do I exist? First place to start is our own experience. Don't start with some high, complex philosophical ideas about how we exist. Start with your own experience. Okay, how do I seem to exist? And look at your own experience in different contexts. Sometimes when we're calm and we're meditating, sometimes when we're happy, how do we seem to exist? Sometimes when we're a little, hungry and tired, a little irritated maybe, how do we seem to exist? Sometimes when we're really upset or we're really unhappy, then how do we seem to exist? You'll find the way you appear to yourself, the way you exist, it's different in different circumstances, right? You'll find like they suddenly insult you, or you're suddenly startled and upset. you grasp, you cling to a very concrete kind of existence. You'll probably find when you have a sense of awe, a sense of wow, wonderment at the beauty of things, there's a much less concrete sense of how we exist, right? Just naturally. So yes, when we talk about the perception of existence, we mean our experience, our psychology, which doesn't mean so much like our emotional dramas, but more like our own personal experience, our mental experience, emotional and also more just, not so emotional, just kind of like, I don't know what, real, I don't know. Yeah, I can't find, there's a word, I don't know, what's a word for like, not emotional, but just clearly aware. So I'm not sure. But anyway, just how it exists. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, next question from, Roberto Valencia. If we are a collection of parts and there's no truly existent I, who's the agent of karma? Why do we talk about our karma if there's no I that owns the karma? Excellent question, Roberto. Thank you. So first of all, I'll take your last question first. Why do we talk about our karma if there's no I that owns the karma? So Roberto, pinch yourself. Now, does it hurt? Yes. There is you that is pinching, and there's a you that's feeling the pain of the pinch. You exist, like I exist, you exist. As individuals, people, we exist. There's no question about that. So it is our karma. We can talk about our karma because there is a person who creates karma, and there's a person who experiences the results of that karma. And it's the same person, even though they exist at different times. They're not exactly the same at the different times. Like all of you, are you exactly the same now as you were when we started this session? No, right? At least you're an hour older. If your mind has, hopefully your mind has got some questions or something. Hopefully you got some new information, but definitely you've changed, right? We all experience, every time we experience something, we change. We become a different person. Now, I mean, we become a different person. It's not like we're totally a different person, like I'm one person and you're another person. Not like that. But we became different than we were in the moment before, right? So each moment we are changing. We're the same person existing through many moments, through many minutes, hours, months, years, many lifetimes even. That's a little more difficult to get our head around, but there's the same person going from life to life. And so obviously that person is radically different from one life to the next. But because there's a continuity of something that is where one moment is similar to the next, and they're part of a unified continuum that's unified by, the cause effect, producing an effect, God producing an effect, God producing an effect, and those all being related, then there's a person. So, the you that began this session, we've been changing through each moment. Now, an hour later, we're the same person, but we're different than we were at the beginning of the session, right? So basically we're like a river. I mean, the best example for what we are as a person is like a stream or a river. The river, there's the same, the same river has been flowing through, northern India, the Ganga River. It's the Ganga River. It's there millions of years ago, at least hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's there now. It will be there, thousands of years from now, I hope. But it's never the same in any moment. Every moment it's different. Same river, but it's changing all the time. So that way, so this is the long answer to Roberto's second question. So there is an I, right? That we create, there's a person, we create karma, we experience the results of karma, right? But, so then his first question, if we are a collection of parts, so first of all, we're not a collection of parts, right? I mentioned that briefly at the beginning, but it requires some repetition, and thinking about to get our head around. So we have a collection of parts. I have a body. I have all parts of my body, my head, my ears, my mouth, my nose, my arms, my legs, my organs. Those are all parts of my body, right? I have all those parts, but I'm not any of those parts. I'm not my head. I'm not my nose. I'm not my chin. I'm not my arms and legs, but those are all parts of me. But yet, why is it when someone touches my hand, I say they're touching me? You know, when a mosquito bites my neck, I say the mosquito's biting me. My neck is not me. I'm not my neck. So why is it that when the mosquito bites my neck, it's biting me? What's the relationship between me and the parts of me? So this is your question, really. So, okay, so all the parts of my body, they're parts of me. All the parts of my mind, they're parts of me. So there's a collection of parts, a collection of parts of my body and my mind. I'm not the collection of parts. The collection is not me. So what am I? I'm something that is imputed on that collection of parts, right? Looking at this collection of parts of body and mind, I impute I. Oh, that is I. Thereby I exist. There's nothing more substantial than that, right? So the I does exist. How does it exist? As something that's imputed on a collection of parts. Now here, many people make a mistake. Well, then the body must be real and the mind must be real. Okay, well then point to me, what's your body? No, I can point to this. This is not my body. This is part of my body, my head. I can point to this. This is not my body. It's part of my body. What I can point to any part of my body and say the same thing. Any part of my body is not the whole. Why? Because to be my body, it has to possess all the parts of my body. No individual part of my body possesses all those parts, right? So then you might think, well, my body is just a collection of all those parts. But actually not. The collection of all the parts of my body, again, is the basis upon which I impute my body. Thereby, my body exists, right? And the same with our mind. So you can see we've gone down a level, right? From how does the person exist? I, the person, how does it exist? It's imputed on a collection of parts, the body and mind. But then we might think, well, those parts really exist. But no, each of those parts has its own parts and is imputed on those parts. So you've gone down another level, analyze, well, what is the body? Well, the body is also something imputed on a collection of parts. And then you go down another level. Well, maybe the parts of the body, they really exist. So then take my hand. You know, this is not my hand. This is not, my pinky is not my hand. My ring finger is not my hand. My thumb is not my hand. The skin of the hand is not the hand. The bones are not, the tendons are not. So where's the hand? What is the hand? There's a whole collection of parts. I labeled my hand. It is a hand, but how does it exist? It's something that's labeled on the collection of parts that are its basis. And then you go down and down and down until its wholeness gets to the level of quantum particles, right? This wholeness brings up quantum mechanics again and again and again. It's important to think about why. Because down at the level of quantum particles, you know, photons and neutrinos and Higgs bosons and things, how do those things exist, right? I can't explain very well, but basically, you know, you look at the two-slit experiment or the double-slit experiment, you know, particles, you fire protons at a pair of slits, it creates a wave interference pattern on a background plate. What does that indicate? That the particles, as they go through the slits, they exist as waves, not as particles, right? But then you close one of the slits and you place an observer at the slit, then you don't get a wave interference pattern. The particles just go through and they hit as particles. So it looks like they never existed in the wave state. So particles, are they particles or are they waves? Do they have a definite location in space as a particle does or not, as a wave that's spread out over an area? Something cannot be both, you know, you cannot be both a particle and a wave at the same time. So what are they? And why does this act of observation make any difference? According to classical physics, the act of observation should make no difference in terms of what something is. But in terms of quantum mechanics, it makes all the difference. So, yeah. Okay, so now, do any of you, okay, I see Madhavji, welcome back from long ago, from America. What's your question? I want to take some questions from you in the Zoom room, that's what I'm saying. Starting with Madhavji.
How are you?
I'm very good.
Nice,
How are you, G?
nice to see you again. I'm wonderful.
Nice to see you.
I know we were talking about the quantum physics and so on and so forth, right? Now, where does, you know, the amount of purification we have to do to get to that level? Obviously, we have to purify, right? In order to get rid of all the karmas, to get to the point of understanding the whole meaning of emptiness. What does all this all play in?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's an excellent question. How much purification do we have to do? I mean, there's not like, I can't give you like a specific number, you know, but
because, you know,
I know
some
that's not
schools,
what you're expecting. I'm just kind of joking.
you know, I'm just,
But
because one, you know, 1 million prostrations of this and do this and, you know, so on and so forth. So I'm trying to, you know,
yeah.
that's what I'm trying to grasp my hand around. That's all. My head around, actually.
Yeah, I mean, don't get caught up with the numbers. We want to focus more on the quality of our mind, right? So the whole purpose of doing purification is to improve the quality of our mind. How? By reducing our, you know, our destructive and afflictive negative thoughts and emotions and tendencies. You know, you might see like, you know, at one point in your life, you're very short-tempered, very irritable. You know, you easily get offended, easily become very impatient with people. But then, you know, you practice some meditation, you practice some purification, some contemplation, and later in your life, you're more calm, you're more forgiving, you're more, you know, you have a better temperament, you know. Then you can see that some positive changes happen, right? So that's the kind of thing when you're doing purification you want to look at, right? Is my mind becoming better? Because the main process of purification is looking to find our own faults. You know, so often we don't want to look at our faults. We just think, oh, everyone else is wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. It's everyone else that's the problem, right? So we want to generate the opposite view, that looking at our own mistakes and, you know, that we've made in the past, see them as mistakes, try to generate a determination not to do those things which are harmful to others in the future, right? And thereby improve. So as we do that, then gradually, naturally, our mind becomes more peaceful. As our mind becomes more peaceful, it's like water. You know, when water is very stirred up, it tends to be murky and not clear. As it becomes calm, the sediment settles out and it becomes more clear and luminous. So our mind is the same thing. So as our mind becomes more clear, we can have more powerful wisdom, gain more insight into things, right? And so that's what that's why purification is important. Right? So that's related to what we talked about earlier, the 3 higher trainings. The training in ethical discipline and pure morality, which leads to concentration, better mental concentration, which leads to better wisdom. But another thing related to your question is that, you know, even when we feel like we really don't understand and we're just confused, I mean, another big aspect of understanding emptiness, generating the wisdom, realizing emptiness, that's talked about again and again in the sutras and in the ancient Indian commentaries, the Tibetan commentaries, is the importance of imprints. One is, so even when we don't understand, when we listen to a talk by His Holiness or by Venerable Droma, or we discuss emptiness with another person, or we read books about, you know, the Buddhist teachings in general, especially about emptiness, it puts imprints on the mind. Even we don't understand, just seeing and hearing those words and those explanations, it puts imprints on the mind. And so we have to think about generating understanding and generating positive qualities over many lifetimes, not just this life, right? So when you know, for people who they meet teachings on emptiness and they, or any of the Buddhist teachings or anything, even, you know, about, like Mozart, think about Mozart. Why was he able to compose, you know, orchestras or operas, great works? I'm probably getting the word wrong. What is it? What did Mozart compose when he was very young? Symphonies? Anyway, something. Why is Mozart able to compose great musical works when he's really young? Why do prodigies exist? Because imprints from past lives. Imprints from past lives, they acquired that knowledge, and in this life they just need to be reminded, and then they have the same skills again. So when we don't understand things, we have to have faith that, you know, just making effort, exposing our mind, engaging with these ideas, it puts imprints on the mind, and then later in this life, and also in future lives, it just becomes easier and easier and easier. One of the best qualities about our human mind, about the mind in general, is whatever we make effort into doing, it only becomes easier, right? It doesn't become harder through the force of habituation. Okay. Do we have another question? I think Santana has her hand up.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I have a question about, you know, if this is a realization happening through the mind, how does it affect your body? You know, like at the beginning of this, like you just mentioned about, you know, having imprints from different lives and that coming through, you know, based and being reminded and developing kind of like the technicals that maybe His Holiness was referring to when it comes to, you know, having bodhicitta and developing bodhicitta and concentration and all of that. So,
Well, Santana, though, I don't understand your analogy. When you say it's like a railway station coming through the mind, you mean like the mind is like a railway station? It's like it's chaos and total mess, like an Indian railway station, or like a train?
No, the realization. What's the connection you know, that's happening when you start having the realizations? Like, does it manifest in the body somehow?
Hold on. You mean like so like the stream of consciousness is coming into one body and then leaving that body at the time of death and taking rebirth in another body?
I'm talking having the realization of emptiness.
Okay, the railway station of emptiness.
The realization, sorry.
What's the train here?
No train.
Okay, so where's the person meditating on emptiness? Are they there a person in the railway station?
No, Venerable, I think you misheard. Stephanie was saying realization, not railway station. There was no train whatsoever.
I thought I heard railway station of trains. Okay.
That's my Colombian accent, sorry.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, realization. So the realization of emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
What is the effect on the the effect of the realization of emptiness in the body? I think that was
body. Okay. Yeah, interesting question. What is the effect of the realization of emptiness on the body? You know, well, in general, when you have actual realization of emptiness, everything seems much more dreamlike, right? Much more, everything seems less concrete, less heavy, less like solid and real, right? What's your daughter doing? So, hello, Santana's daughter. Hello. So in general, when you realize emptiness, everything seems more ephemeral, more light, and kind of, yeah, dreamlike. So imagine, you know, an experience in this life when you feel like things are very dreamlike. You know, maybe like the first time you fell in love, or, you know, something really good happened to you, and you go outside and it's like, you know, the sun is shining, the sky is blue, you feel like singing and dancing. How does it affect your body? You feel much more light and at ease and comfortable, and the body is full of joy. I mean, your mind is full of joy. When the mind is full of joy, the body also has very pleasant, it feels very good. So I think realization of emptiness, definitely everything seems more ephemeral. And imagine when you realize emptiness, you definitely, I mean, well, for most people, they feel great joy because it's something they've been striving to achieve for a long time. Through study and practice, they've been working very hard at really deeply understanding emptiness, and suddenly they come to a very powerful insight into it. And so they're overwhelmed by joy. Right? So then you can imagine the body would feel very, very good as well. So is there another part of your question? I think there were, but I kind of forgot.
No, that was really it. Okay. For me, it was mainly like any physical reactions that I may have had. started to experience?
Well, they say, I mean, for most of the realizations on the path, there are a description of different physical reactions that we have. But usually, like one is, realize emptiness, that your hairs stand on end and tears come from your eyes. It moves your mind. It moves your mind such that it's very emotional experience. But for most people, I said joyful, but for some people, it gives rise to great fear, right? Because they think that when they realize emptiness, they think that they're ceasing to exist, that they don't exist, and that gives rise to fear. So always the advice is that it's very important to just push through that fear. So, there's a certain analysis, which hopefully we'll talk about, or Venerable Droma is teaching you in the emptiness course. You do certain analysis, use certain reasoning, kind of like the analysis of what am I? Am I my body? Am I my mind? Am I the parts of my body? Am I something different from those? So this kind of analysis to understand what we are, and then become this insight that I don't exist at all in the way I did before. So for some people who don't have such a good understanding of the analysis, they fall into nihilism. They start to think like, oh, I don't exist. But the important thing is to not stop the analysis, to continue with the analysis, but also use the reasoning to establish your existence, like pinching yourself and seeing if, you feel it. Right? So, and then just push through the fear. Okay, I'm going to give someone else an opportunity to ask a question, or maybe I'll take one from the chat now. I'll take this one from Sachin. Can one access the end of life, clear mind while we're alive? Yeah, so His Holiness talked about the clear light mind at the time of death, I think, in the question and answer period. So this person's asking, can we access that world while we're alive? Yes, it is possible. Well, almost. I mean, there's something called the clear light mind of death is called like the mother clear light. And when we can access something very similar, almost exactly the same before we actually go through the death process. So that's called the child clear light. So what meditators do is they meditate in different ways where they imagine dying. And so they study and become familiar with the death process, a little bit of which His Holiness spoke about today, where there's the absorption of the gross levels of consciousness, and then the arising of more and more subtle levels of the mental consciousness, whereby we have the white appearance, red increase, black near attainment. So these increasingly more subtle levels of mental consciousness cease to function, and then finally the most subtle level of mind becomes manifest, and we can experience that. So that's called the clear light mind. So when you're actually going through the death process, it's the clear light mind at the time of death, but you can experience that almost that same level of mind before, through the power of meditation, through sleep yoga and other things. And then, so you practice using that level of mind to meditate on emptiness. And then when you actually die, then you merge the child and the mother clear light mind. Yeah, so basically, yes, is the answer. Okay, and the Zoom room, I don't see any hands up. You guys have questions? All right, so one more question from the chat, from Theo. How do we differentiate the mind stream from the self? It is the entity that is constantly changing, right? Good question. How do we differentiate the mind stream from the self? It is the entity that's constantly changing, right? Hold on, so Theo, when you say it is the entity that's constantly changing, right? By it, are you talking about the mind stream or the self?
I'm talking about the mind stream.
The it. So when you say it is constantly changing, you mean the mind stream is constantly changing, right? Yes. Yeah, the mind stream is constantly changing. And that we can experience. You just try to watch your breath for 10 minutes and you'll see how difficult it is. Why? Because the mind stream is constantly changing. The mind, the focus of the mind is going all over the place. Because every moment we're experiencing different objects and the way we experience objects is different. So yes, the mind stream is continually changing. Now, Theo, the Venerable Kunben told me that, are you in the course with Venerable Droma?
Yes.
Yeah. So Venerable Kunpa told me that in your course of Venerable Droma, you've been going through, just very briefly, through the 4 schools
Yes.
in Tibetan Buddhism. The Great Exposition School, the Sutra School, the Mind-Only School, and then the Middle Way School. In the Middle Way School, there's 2, right? The Autonomous Middle Way School and the Consequentialist Middle Way School. And I hope Venerable Droma has been using the English terms because that's easier, I think. So, well, basically, first of all, I need to say this. For basically, the highest school is the Consequentialist Middle Way School, right? So that's what His Holiness is presenting according to the Consequentialist Middle Way School. This text by Tsongkapa, actually, this text by Tsongkapa presents first the Mind-Only School, then the Autonomous Middle Way School, and then the Consequentialist Middle Way School. But the highest is the Consequentialist Middle Way School. So for the Consequentialists, the mind stream is not the self, right? For the Consequentialists, the mind stream is not the self. Why? Because it's the basis of imputation for the self, right? You have the basis of imputation and the thing imputed on that. The self is the thing imputed on that. What's it imputed on? Upon the body and the mind. The mind stream is part of the mind. So just like, another helpful way to think about this is that, you can think about anything in terms of it having parts, right? You can think about, like anything, it has parts, basically. Anything that exists, it's made up of parts, especially impermanent things. So especially like look at us as a person, we're made up of parts. All the cells of our body, all the moments of our mental experience, all the moments of our mind, those are all parts. So anything that exists, it has parts, and then there's a part possessor, which means the thing that possesses all those parts. So I'll just look at a more simple example. This is my watch, right? So my watch is a part possessor, right? What does that mean? It possesses a lot of parts. It has a little buckle, it has a band, it has a face, the dial, it has all the gears inside. So those are all the parts of the watch. The watch is the part possessor. So whatever is a part of the watch cannot be the part possessor of the watch. Whatever is the part possessor, the watch, it cannot be the part. So in relation to any specific phenomena, the parts of that phenomena and the part possessor, which is that phenomena itself, they're mutually exclusive. One cannot be the other. So in regard to us as a person, so according to the Consequentialist school, our stream of consciousness is a part of the person. Thereby, it's not the person. But to make it, to throw in a little bit of, flavor, for the Autonomous Middle Way School down, they posit 2 kinds of persons. One is the merely imputed person, which is what we ordinarily think of the person, and the other is the stream of consciousness, which is called the substantial person. So for the Autonomous Middle Way School, the Mind-Only School, and so on, they feel like in order to explain the imprints of karma going from one life to another, you need something more substantial than just a merely imputed person. You need something that's like more real. So they posit the stream of consciousness that goes from life to life as that which carries the imprints, right? So for them, the stream of consciousness is a person, right? And the person that's imputed on the collection of body and mind is also a person, but they're slightly different kinds of persons. For the Consequentialist school, again, the stream of consciousness is not a person because it's a basis of imputation for the person.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to, I don't want to hog up too much time, but if there's time, I just wanted to, the Consequentialist school, the highest school, also accept that the mind stream goes from life to life, right? And would that not mean that part of the mind, if we talk about the mind stream as part of the mind, has some element of permanence?
Yeah, good question. Well, let's look at you. If you don't mind, can I take you as an example?
Sure.
So Theo has gone from, what time is it now? Well, in Indian Standard Time, it's 6:30. So Theo has gone in an unbroken continuum from 5 o'clock to 6:30, right? So does that mean Theo is permanent?
No.
Why
No,
not?
yeah, I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
Why is Theo not permanent?
Well, because Theo has changed in some respect across that 1 hour and a half, even if it's in a very minute way, and yet still the concept of Theo persists.
And not
So
only
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, exactly. Why is Theo not permanent? Because he's changing moment by moment, every moment, changing, right? Anything that's changing momentarily changing means it's changing in each moment. It's not permanent. Permanent means not changing moment by moment, right? So, so the stream of consciousness, but yet Theo has moved in an unbroken continuum from 5 o'clock to 6:30. All of us have, not just Theo. I mean, all of us have. Everything that exists in the universe actually has moved in an unbroken continuum. Well, maybe not everything. We have to be careful. But most things, right, have moved in an unbroken continuum from 5 o'clock to 6:30. And they've been changing each moment. So they're not exactly the same at 6:30 as they were at 5 o'clock. But because they're very similar and because they've changed not in a random and chaotic way, things change in a very orderly and predictable way, right? So it's not like if things change in a random, chaotic way, then, you know, like one moment of Theo would give rise to a second moment of, I don't know, Maya, and that would give rise to a moment of, I don't know, who else was here? Santana or whatever, you know, like one thing could produce anything else, right? You know, or like one moment of Legstok could produce, you know, a moment of apple, and then that could transform into a dog, and that could transform into a chair. But there's not, the cause and effect does not work in a chaotic way like that. It's very orderly. So thereby we can look like a river again, right? We can apply to the stream of consciousness that goes from life to life. It's not like, do your parents' consciousness become yours? No, right? If we have children, does our mind become their stream of consciousness? No, they stay separate, right? So our stream of consciousness produces a subsequent, or each, you can say like this, each moment of our stream of consciousness produces a subsequent moment, which is very similar to, and only slightly different from the previous moment, right? So moment 1 of my stream of consciousness produces moment 2 of my stream of consciousness. Moment 2 of my stream of consciousness is very, very, very similar to moment 1, but not exactly the same. It's slightly different, right? So like that, that's how we know that it's part of the same stream, right? And we label the person. Okay, so where are we now? We have only a half hour left. Okay, Maya, I'll take one more question and then we'll do some meditation.
Yeah, hi, thank you first for the teaching. So we can say that, for instance, the fact that Buddha got enlightened, so when you get enlightened, that's permanent, right?
What do you mean? When you get enlightenment, that's permanent. You mean?
Yeah, you cannot go back. Permanent, the fact that you are enlightened.
Okay, yeah, the fact that you're enlightened does not change, right?
Yeah, so that's like a permanent phenomena in a way, if you can.
Yes.
Say
yes.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. Okay, and so I was just wondering, like, the fact that we have a mind is a permanent thing, then?
Yeah,
or,
see,
I mean, a mind that changes.
The fact that we have a mind, so, okay, so our mind changes very clearly, right? Our mind changes moment by moment. But the fact that we have a mind, that does not change. That's true, that's permanent. Okay. You know, like my watch, this watch here, it's changing moment by moment. But the fact that this is a watch, that's not changing. That might change though. You know, if suddenly I don't know, someone put a little bomb in it and it just explodes, then the watch goes out of existence, right? So it ceases to exist, which is, it's kind of a change, right? But it's not that the watch has changed has changed. Well, you could say the watch has changed in something else. If I smash the watch up or I throw it in a fire, it changes into a lump of, stuff, right? So it's being a watch. It does not change moment by moment. That's the main point here, right? So when a person becomes a Buddha, the fact that they are a Buddha, it never changes. They're always enlightened. Like the fact that you are Maya now, that's not changing moment by moment. But the person Maya is changing moment by moment. So?
Okay. No, I'm trying to define those concepts in my mind, just the small little things that I'm trying to, help myself create this picture. But I was wondering also regarding to what we read in the sutra, the explanation about, the fact that we have to again and again and again examine, it's been there always in the sutra from the time that it was written down?
Hold on, what you mean what we read during the review session here?
Yes. Like it's not something that was, because I was wondering, and tell you why I'm asking, because with, for instance, the last meeting that we had with His Holiness in Bulgaria, so someone was asking precisely about that. We had a tourist encounter with him, and then someone was asking, so you should always examine if the things that has been presented to you by the teachers go coexistence with what is being said from the Dharma. And then His Holiness says, yes, always. And then someone asked again, also for if you practice Tantra, and His Holiness says, yes, also to that question. So I was wondering if those things, those sort of like, what was the word that I'm looking for? Instructions of how to examine yourself as, practitioner, or I don't know, I mean, has been there with the sutras always. Because sometimes it seems that it's been twisted along the way. I don't know. I mean, I was just wondering
about I mean, always is a big, it's a big field. But I mean, I would think that the main answer is yes. I mean, you can think always like in terms of just Shakyamuni Buddhist teachings, because the Buddhist worldview is beginningless time, right? So in essence, like in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, it says again and again and again, these Perfection of Wisdom Sutras have been taught since beginningless time by all the Buddhas. But yet, if we look at just this 2,500 years since Shakyamuni Buddhist teachings have existed, and you look from like an academic historical perspective, there's a lot of debate about, well, when did the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras really arise, for example? Or were they actually the word of the Buddha, or were they something that's made up later on, right? So that's a whole other question. Even like, this famous verse that His Holiness always quotes, that Tsongkapa quotes, that, where the Buddha said, you should examine my teachings like a goldsmith analyzes gold. It's actually not really clear where that verse comes from, what sutra it comes from. It's quoted, you'll see in the document I put up, I wrote that it's a verse that's cited by Arya Deva as being from a specific sutra, but we don't actually have that sutra. It seems to have been lost, right? So then, but there's another sutra that's in the Pali Canon actually called, I think it's called the Teachings to the People of Kalama or something like that, the Kalama Sutra, where the Buddha says almost the exact same thing, that you should analyze any teacher, you should analyze that person's teaching to see if it's valid or not. So I think that general idea, has seemed to have been in, Buddhist teachings from the very beginning. I mean, definitely you can find it present in the Pali Canon. And even in the Vinaya, which is some of the oldest and most, the oldest sections of the Buddhist teachings, historically verifiable, and they're the same in the largely the same in the Chinese, the Pali, and the Tibetan canon. So they're quite certified, and they record a lot of historical events from the life of the Buddha. So even in the Vinaya teachings, yeah, there's I don't know, there's definitely not a huge emphasis, but it's taught that we should examine our actions. We should examine what is true, what's not true, what's right, wrong in this situation, using our own wisdom and logic, not just blindly following what has been told by our teachers or senior people or something like that. So I think, yeah, that emphasis on logic and reason. I mean, try to think about the Buddha's life story. For example, are there instances from Buddha's life story where he encouraged people, his disciples, his followers, to think and examine clearly? Yeah, I think we can find. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess sometimes it's
Okay.
a bit confusing because, yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying sometimes it's a bit confusing because also we don't have I don't have an enlightened mind. Yeah, hopefully maybe one lifetime I would have. So sometimes it seems like, there is teachers that we refer to them as someone that has more knowledge than myself. And then if I, with my unenlightened mind, don't know perhaps what's the right thing to do, and then I'm getting, there is a teacher this or another that, gives me an instruction that sometimes feels that maybe that's not exactly what I would have done without those instructions. Then how do I know, I guess, within this, what's the right thing to do?
Yeah. I mean, definitely that's quite common. That's not that a teacher gives us instruction. I mean, I've also had the same experience where they ask you to do something, which, yeah, from my own side, I totally wouldn't do. But yeah, I mean, you can, well, the first thing His Holiness said is check if it accords with, other Dharma teachings or not, if it seems contradictory to a basic, especially ethics. I mean, morality and ethics is the basis of our practice, and not harming others, benefiting others as much as we can. So if a teacher tells us to do something that we feel like seems unethical, then we should definitely analyze very carefully. And that can include talking with other more senior Dharma students, talking with other teachers. Although when we do that, it's usually to leave names out, just mention the advice that was told, right? But then we have to be careful. But a teacher might ask us to do some kind of practice, like prostrations to the 35 Buddhas or Vajrasattva mantras or something that we've never done before. And so we're not really sure, is that even a real Buddhist practice or not, or something. But then, yeah, we can do some reading about it, ask other people about it, but also we can just actually try it a little bit to see how it affects our minds and see if it seems beneficial for our mind or if it doesn't seem beneficial, right? So that's another way to investigate, is by trial and error, by our own experimentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, but this issue, I mean, one issue you did touch on, which is really difficult, is like, if we ourselves don't have much knowledge of Dharma, how do we investigate a teaching to see if it accords with Dharma or not? I mean, that's really difficult. And that came up in the paragraphs we just read, where, we don't have a correct understanding of emptiness. How do we interpret the Buddhist teachings to see which are valid teachings on emptiness and thereby definitive teachings, and which are not teachings on the ultimate view of emptiness, and thereby they're interpretive teachings, and they need to be interpreted in some way. If we don't have good understanding of emptiness ourselves, how do we do that, right? So Tsongkapa's answer to that is kind of like, well, we start by relying on these great Indian masters that were prophesied by the Buddha, right? So already it involves a little bit of mystic element. They're prophesied by the Buddha. Like, what does that mean, that the Buddha prophesied them, right? Well, how do we know that prophecy is a valid prophecy, right? There's no end to the question. But we have to start someplace, right? So
yeah.
So we start there, but it doesn't mean we just blindly believe whatever they said. It means we start there with these are the ones prophesied by the Buddha are Asanga and Nagarjuna. We start with their works, and then we apply the best reasoning we have. So basically, that's the kind of process, is we use what wisdom we have. We all have some degree of understanding and some degree of wisdom, even if it's not like, doesn't come expressly from Buddhist teachings, just from what our parents taught us, what we've learned in our childhood experiences as an adolescent. From our life experiences, we have a store of wisdom and understanding, right? So we use that as the starting place, and we use that as best we can. And then we generate better and better ideas about what is the ultimate truth. And based on those, we investigate the teachings. Then that causes us to reformulate, reshape our ideas a little bit. Then again, we do more study, we do more reflection. Then again, we change our ideas a little bit. So it's this back and forth process, and gradually we gain a deeper and deeper and a more clear and more sound understanding. Like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know there's a few more questions in the chat room, but yeah, I think it's important we actually try to, not just talk, but actually try to have some experience. So let's do a little meditation now, and then we'll dedicate. So I'm afraid we won't get to discussion groups today, but I think it's okay. Okay, so relax your mind, relax your body, be comfortable in a meditation posture. So begin to draw your attention inwards. Maybe it's good to just come to your breath. Watch your breath or watch your mind, something kind of neutral. Take a few deep breaths, relax. Let your mind kind of settle down. And then briefly remember your positive motivation from the outset of the session. Regenerate positive motivation. So then just try to keep your awareness in the present moment. So not thinking about the past and thinking about the future, but just looking at our experience in the present moment. And let's meditate on impermanence a little bit. Just look at how we're changing from moment to moment. This is something that's come up a lot in our conversation. His Holiness spoke about today. And this is really kind of the starting place for meditating on emptiness. Right? So without getting complex at all, Just try to stay in the present moment. And why don't we first look at how our body is changing? So we can ask ourselves the question, is my body, the physical aspect of myself as a person, my physical experience, is it changing moment by moment? And just observe. We can ask the question, a further question, is there any part of my body, from the big parts, the head, shoulders, the arms, the legs, down to the smallest parts, the cells, and parts of the cells, the DNA, the atoms and molecules that make up the cells. Is there any part of my body that is not changing every moment? Moment by moment. And then finally, for our body, how is it that every part of our body is changing each moment, and yet we have the same body through time? Right? How is it that this one body that we have exists through time, and yet every moment, all the parts of it are changing? And then shift your focus of attention to your mind. So remember, there's all different parts of our mind. Those are our sense consciousness, like our eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, body sense consciousness. And then there's our mental consciousness. So again, try to remain in the present moment and just look at whatever, whatever aspect of your consciousness of your mind appears to you. Whether it's your ear sense consciousness, your body sense consciousness, your thought consciousness, your mental consciousness. And just check, is it changing? Is my mind changing? Are all these aspects, these parts of my consciousness, are they all changing moment to moment? Is there any aspect of my mind that's not changing each moment? And then again, with regard to our mind, so if every part of our mind is changing each moment to some degree, how is it that we say the same mind moves through time? Or that we have this one stream of consciousness going through time? What does that mean? How is it that the same, I consciousness existed before, exists now, moves into the future? How is it that the same stream of mental consciousness exists in each moment and yet changes? So in short, how does our mind, if it's changing every moment, how can we say that my mind, exists through time? Okay, can relax. Let's relax our attention there. All right, I see one more question in the chat. Someone asked, is the self made up of the aggregates? Yes, it is. Then what is phenomena made up of? Well, phenomena, it means anything that exists is a phenomenon. So, different phenomena are made up of different things, but they're all made up of their parts. So, if you want to do homework, some meditation homework, then look at this kind of relationship between, remember I was discussing how, the person, so we've been looking at the body and the mind, right, in this meditation. So the next step is to look at the person. Us as a person is the same way. Am I changing moment by moment? Is every part of me changing moment by moment? If every part, or at least most of the parts of me are changing moment by moment, how is it that I say the same person exists through time? Right? So do the same analysis that we did with regard to the body and the mind, do with regard to the person, right? And then look at how is it that the person is labeled on the body and mind, right? Remember we talked about this difference between the basis of imputation, the collection of body and mind, and the thing that is imputed, the person, and how they cannot be the same. Why? Because the basis of imputation are parts of the person, and the person is the part possessor, right? The part possessor cannot be the same as the parts. The parts cannot be the part possessor with regard to any specific one object, right? So how is it that the person possesses the parts? How is it that I possess a body and mind, right? That's another, if you want to meditate some more, I recommend you could try to analyze that. That'd be very fruitful. And then I wanted to mention just one thing. What was I thinking before we go? I'll share my screen. So in this document again that we've been looking, I was remembering there are a lot of verses, quite a few verses I didn't get to go through. But look, in this document, I just want to point out with regard to each verse or pair of verses, I've given the author. So like here's Nagarjuna, the text name, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, and then the chapter. Here's chapter 24 and the verse number. For most of them, I've given that, right? Why do I do that? So, because people ask me, when we're doing courses and stuff like this, what to read? Well, there you go. I mean, so that you can go back to the source, When you hear His Holiness give quotations that are explaining important points and can be very helpful for your practice, it's really helpful if most of those verses, you can't just read it and understand immediately what it says. They're quite difficult, right? But you can go back, go back to the work where they're from, read the verses before and after, and then look for commentaries on that work. Or take those verses to your local teacher, or in the next course you're in, ask your teacher, like, what does this mean? And then gradually you get some, understanding, and it's really helpful, I'm telling you. To read those verses, become familiar with them, use them as a basis for your contemplation. It's really, really helpful. I found in my own experience, I'm sure you will too. I know many, many people have through the ages. So I want to encourage you to become familiar with and use those. Okay, so let's dedicate now. That's the end of the session. So thank you very much. We'll do the same thing more or less tomorrow night with regard to what His Holiness teaches tomorrow morning. Okay, so think of all the merit we've created. Briefly, rejoice. We've been putting good effort into understanding the root cause of all suffering and how to eliminate it, right? How to generate the wisdom of emptiness, which realizes the ignorance, which is the fundamental cause of the suffering of ourselves and all other sentient beings. So how wonderful it is. And then remember the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, of Shakyamuni Buddha, of so many other teachers, Nagarjuna, Shantideva, and so forth through the ages. All the, how they've been just the same as us in the past, and they've put in so much effort and work to become, to gain realizations, become enlightened. How wonderful it is. And then generally think about so many kind-hearted people working to benefit others throughout the universe, in the past, in the present. Especially during the time of this global pandemic, COVID-19. So many people seeing others in hardship, whether they're sick, or they're out of a job, or they're lonely, and doing something to try to benefit, to try to alleviate the suffering of their fellow humans, and fellow creatures, including animals, other creatures. How wonderful it is. So we rejoice. So all that merit, then we gather together, we dedicate that all sentient beings, without excluding even one, may all be completely free from every form of suffering and the causes of suffering, karma and afflictive emotions. And may they have every happiness, from ordinary mundane happiness up to full enlightenment. And may every action that I engage in of my body, speech, and mind all contribute to these, to reducing the suffering and increasing the well-being and happiness of myself and all other sentient beings. Okay, so thank you very much, and yeah, have a good evening, and see you tomorrow. Felipe?